Hello dear students. Today we'll begin with a new chapter. Chapter number 10, Cell Cycle and Cell Division. This is a very important chapter. This chapter has a direct relevance with the genetics, our existence. Before coming to this chapter, let's recapitulate what we have already studied. In chapter 8, we studied cell, the structural and functional unit of life. And in chapter 1, we studied about the properties of life. Now, in that, we studied that the living organisms have the ability to reproduce. But how is this process of reproduction possible? The answer is in this chapter. We know that all living organisms are made up of cell and its products. It may be a unicellular organism or multicellular organism. And all these organisms, if they have to multiply, if they have to reproduce, the only possible way is cell division. So in this chapter, we will study about the various aspects of cell division. So this chapter is basically, though it's a small chapter, but it is very important. We will focus on 3 topics. One is cell cycle, mitosis and meiosis. Today, I will take up the first topic, that is cell cycle. Before going into the details of the cell cycle, let's first find out how does a cell know when it has to divide. Yes, dear students, there is a very well developed mechanism inside the cell through which it knows when to divide. And that mechanism is called as NC ratio. N stands for nucleus and C stands for cytoplasm. So it's called nuclear cytoplasmic ratio. In a very newly developed cell, this NC is very high. And when the cell becomes mature, the NC ratio goes down. What does it mean? It means that the nucleus and the cytoplasm, the nucleus is a controlling factor and it controls the cytoplasm. When the size of the cytoplasm increases, then NC ratio goes down. From a particular point, the cell knows now the NC ratio has gone down, so it promotes a property of the cell which is called as cell division. This cell division may be of different types. Very simple organisms, like we studied about the reproduction in amoeba, that is binary fission. It's also a type of cell division. And that cell division is called as amitosis, because it's just a roughly breaking up of a large cell whose NC ratio has gone down. It breaks up into 2 parts and both the parts can exist as new organism. Because amoeba is a unicellular organism, it can survive with this simple type of cell division. But the multicellular organism, where the structural organization is very complex, such simple division is not possible. The cells have to divide very systematically. For that, they undergo another type of reproduction, another type of cell division, which is called as mitosis, which is called as somatic division. And when the sexually reproducing organisms, they mature, they produce certain types of cells which are called as gametes. They are the reproductive cells. For the production of those gametes, those cells they undergo another type of reproduction which is called as meiosis. So I told you about three types of reproduction, that is amitosis, very simple. Then comes the mitosis, which is complex, and meiosis, which is the most complex type of cell division. So today we will study only the first part, that is called as cell cycle. How does a cell undergo different phases during its lifetime? So let's study it. So dear students, this is a diagram explaining the various stages and phases of a cell cycle. What is a cell cycle? Cell cycle is a time period between two successive cell divisions. And it is basically divided into two main phases. The first phase is called as interphase and second phase is called as M phase. Interphase controls 95% time period of a cell cycle, and only for 5% time there is the process of cell division. So the average time period of a cell cycle in a eukaryotic cell is approximately 24 hours. So you can understand that out of these 24 hours, for 23 hours the cell is showing interphase, and interphase is called as the resting phase of the cell cycle. Why resting phase? Does the cell rest during that time? This term resting phase is a very deceiving or misnomer. The cell is very active during this phase. But why it is called resting phase? Only because the cell is not showing any division during that period. But the cell is preparing itself for the next division. Okay? So generally it is asked, why interphase is called as the resting phase? Or is calling interphase a resting phase is actually correct? No, it's not correct. But it is called only from the point of view of the cell division. During this time, the cell is really very active metabolically. We'll study about it. And the next phase after interphase is the M phase, that is the division phase. So let us study it in detail now. This cell cycle, as I told you, interphase, which is called as the resting phase from the point of view of the cell division, is actually the time period when the cell is preparing itself for the next cell division. So we further divide it into three parts, that is G1, S and G2. See here, G1 stands for gap 1. During this phase, during the gap 1 phase, the newly developed cell, a new cell which is undergoing the cell division, will grow in size, and that's why it is called as cell growth phase. It will produce more of the cell organelles, more mitochondria, then centriole in animal cell. So it will grow in size, and that's why it is called as cell growth phase. Once the cell growth is complete, then the next phase is called as S phase. S stands for synthesis. During this phase, a very important process takes place, which is called as DNA replication. The DNA of the cell multiplies, replicates, and this is called as S phase or DNA replication phase. Now the third phase is called as gap 2 phase. Gap 2 phase is basically the phase where the cell starts producing the protein synthesis. So proteins, enzymes are produced which are required during the division phase. Okay. So these are the three phases of the interphase. Gap 1, that is G1, cell growth, S, DNA replication, and G2 or gap 2, protein synthesis phase. Now after the interphase is complete, now the cell is totally prepared for the division. So then comes the M phase. This M phase again is divided into two parts. The first part is called as karyokinesis and second part is called as cytokinesis. Karyon, you know, nucleus. So it is the division of nucleus. Nucleus divides. That is karyokinesis. And this karyokinesis is further divided into systematically four parts, four phases. This is, the first is called prophase, P. Then second phase is called as metaphase. Third is called as anaphase and fourth is called as telophase. The details of these phases we'll study later on. So these are the four phases of karyokinesis where the nucleus divides. After telophase is complete, now nucleus is divided. Now this nucleus division is followed by the division of the cytoplasm, the cytoplasmic organelles. So that is called as cytokinesis. Now one cell after cytokinesis gets divided into two cells. Here the NC ratio is very less, but a newly divided cell has a very high NC ratio. Okay. Now there I have written this part that is called as G0 phase. Sometimes all the cells don't undergo the cell cycle. They are not dividing continuously. Only few cells in our body are dividing very fast, like our skin cells, our blood cells. Okay, but there are few cells which very rarely divide. For example, our neurons, even muscles, they divide very slow. So these cells, what happens in them, after cytokinesis, they don't undergo the cell cycle completely. They get arrested in gap 1 phase and they don't proceed further. So that stage is called as G0 stage or quiescent phase or resting phase. So there are few cells which undergo cell division and there are few cells which remain restricted in the phase that is called as G0 phase. So this is all about the cell cycle. Okay.